Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on a Career Development Fireside Chat. My name is Charlie Maher. I'm with the ISPE Boston Educational Program Committee. And before we get started, let's cover a couple of housekeeping things. Would like to thank our program sponsors, the DPS Group, ICQ Consultants, and Massey Bioservices. I'd also like to invite everybody to participate in today's event. It's an interactive forum. We're using the Pigeonhole software tool. In your invitation to today's webinar, you received a link to Pigeonhole. The passcode, if you need it, is ISPE July 22. That'll allow you to get into the Pigeonhole room that you can either enter a question, or you can review the questions that have already been entered and vote them up. And what we'll be doing is when we get to the question and answer session, we will actually be using the Pigeonhole questions to prompt our conversation using the questions that are voted highest to indicate the crowdsourced most interesting areas. So I invite you to click on Pigeonhole as we get ourselves lined up and enter your questions and during the conversation too. I'd also like to invite everybody to stay connected to ISPE using our LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter accounts. Please subscribe to those so you can stay abreast of all the things that are coming your way. We have a lot of great programming for you. I'd like to start off with introducing our first speaker today. Jane Rhodes is the Chief Business Officer of Verge Genomics, and she brings more than 20 years of drug discovery, company building, and strategy leadership to the biotech industry. She spent 18 years at Biogen, where her notable achievements include founding the Value-Based Medicine, VBM, Innovation Hub. Based on her work, she co-founded the Curate Health software tool and business, a software development company pioneering the development of patent assessment tools now used as a standard of care in neurology clinics across the world. And I apologize, Jane, about mispronouncing the Curate. It's spelled out capital Q, small r, 8. So very clever, but Curate is the name of the company. So I'm going to hand off to you now, Jane. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the introduction, Charlie, and it's a pleasure to participate in this fireside chat today. So I'm going to spend a bit of time giving you some background on my personal career journey, and hopefully it'll resonate with some of you and prompt some questions about career transitions and choices that I've both made and had the opportunity to be able to make throughout my career. So I started life as a neuroscientist. I have a PhD in neuropharmacology. I did all of my early training in the UK and then moved over to the States, and have had all of my entire career has been spent in the biotech industry, in small, medium and large biotech companies. So as a neuroscientist, I spent the first decade of my career doing discovery research, and in this role across a number of different companies, I learned kind of the basic tenets of drug discovery and had the opportunity to grow a team, learn about resource management and project prioritization. Had the opportunity to interact and develop collaborative relationships with academic scientists and publish scientific work, and also contribute to patent filings and IP development. And it really was, a strong foundation, becoming a subject matter expert in an area of neuroscience research that really has kind of carried me through the rest of my career. I think one of the things that you'll often see in a number of individuals like myself who are on the business side of biotech and pharma is that many of them started life as a scientist and have used that kind of foundational knowledge to grow their career in different directions throughout the industry. And so that's kind of exactly what I did. After about 10 years as a very focused scientist, I wanted to get a more holistic perspective on the business, and chose to move into a role in program management, which was at the time was a part of the business that was it was incorporated in the research and development part of the organization, and so it gave me purview across functions like regulatory and clinical development and new product commercialization and different aspects of the business that I hadn't necessarily had a great deal of exposure to as a research scientist. Then, as part of a strategic reorganization, the function was actually moved into a corporate department, and it became incorporated with functions like finance, business planning, business development, and it became a much more strategic role, and the purview increased to seeing aspects of the business like commercialization, health economics and outcomes research, investor relations, public relations, finance and planning. And so it gave me like a really kind of broad and cross-sectional perspective on different aspects of the business, how it all comes together. As we all know, drug development is a lengthy and complex process. So it was great to have the opportunity to see all of that firsthand through managing programs at different stages of development. And one of the things that I did while I was in this role was to go back and do some mid-career training. Went back to school as an executive training course to do an MBA, and found that incredibly useful to kind of incorporate those learnings directly into the role as I was kind of working on the job doing it, and also really enjoyed the experience of getting a qualification with a bunch of kind of mid-career professionals from completely different backgrounds, all coming together to kind of learn the nuts and bolts of business. So that was, I found that a really motivating and valuable experience to go back mid-career and actually get the MBA qualification. And after about 7 or 8 years in program management, an opportunity was presented to me to help build an innovation hub within the context of a larger company to be able to try and solve for some kind of big, meaty business problems that that we were wrestling with as an organization. One of which was, you know, we just had a big phase 3 failure in ALS, and we were wondering how we could reevaluate how we do phase 2 studies to make them more informative and predictive of phase 3 outcomes. And so built a team around trying to solve that question. And then the second, which actually morphed into a much bigger endeavor, was to try and solve for how we think about personalized medicine, which culminated in developing, as Charlie noted in my introduction, a team around what we called value-based medicine and how we collect real-world data to better inform kind of our business decisions. And that led me down a path of entering into the world of digital health and digital technologies, and culminated in building software as medical device products and ultimately spinning them out to form a company called Curate Health. So that really lit a spark in me around innovation, company formation, and really consolidated my interest in the business side of things. And that's actually where I had my aha moment, I think, in the introductions that we wrote prior to joining this fireside chat. One of some of the best career advice that I've had in across my quite lengthy career was my boss during this time, who gave me the advice that play to your strengths, gravitate towards what you enjoy, and it will give you like a stronger foundation on which to build. Like he said, you can spend years trying to correct the flaws in your in different skill sets that you have, but it won't always move the needle, I think. And I found that to be incredibly valuable advice that I've given to many people along the way, which is, you know, recognize what your intrinsic motivators are, understand where your skills really lie, and move into roles that really play to those strengths. So I just wanted to share that with you, and happy to elaborate more on that if anyone has any questions. So anyway, as I said, this role in this innovation centre really sparked this interest in business, and prompted me to move into more of a formal business development corporate strategy role at another company, which was a really interesting and professionally growing experience. It wasn't a neuroscience company, it was an oncology based company that had some interest in neuroscience, and the reason I joined was to try and create some value and potentially spin out those assets to form another company. So it was a really interesting exercise, and that has led me to my current role, which is a leadership position at a small biotech company that's based in San Francisco, that is cutting edge in the context of the technology that it applies to discovering new drugs, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning based. But it's also interestingly focused exclusively at the moment on neurodegeneration. So I've kind of come full circle back to my foundational core expertise in neuroscience, which I'm finding, because it's a small company and we wear many hats, and I kind of play a role across the scientific, strategic and business side of things, that I am using that foundational scientific knowledge a great deal many years later. So I think that speaks to how one can use different elements of training across one's career to kind of knit together a different set of experiences to find a role that kind of fulfills all your creative juices, if you will. Anyway, the next slide I have really just takes a slightly different lens on the same career journey, but speaks to a few different things that I wanted just to exemplify. And one was that, first of all, I did my training in the UK at the University of Manchester. Both my undergraduate and graduate work was there. While I was there, I had the opportunity to work in Basel at what was then Ciba-Geigy, but has now been subsequently acquired by many other companies. Is now Novartis, I guess. But that really kind of was the first experience that I had to really get a flavour of what drug development was all about, and research in the context of a company. And one thing that I've always kind of reflected on as being an important kind of point or inflection point on my journey was the fact that my PhD advisor, who was a fantastic mentor, always gave her graduate students great exposure to a whole cross-section of opportunities. She was always very conscious that not everybody would want a career in academia, and so always helped provide visibility and opportunities in industry and academia, and many other kind of walks of life for scientists. And I've always kind of tried to pay that forward and do the same for other people, and try and give people visibility into all kinds of different roles that are available in the pharma industry and outside of it, because I think that was something that I always very much valued. And when I left Manchester, I went straight to industry to do a postdoc in a biotech company called Synergen. It was subsequently acquired by Amgen in Boulder, Colorado, which was a fabulous experience in my early to mid 20s, and just living a fabulous life in Colorado as a postdoc was a great experience. And there again, I got to work in a small biotech company to see all aspects of the business, and I also got to build some very substantial academic collaborations. So it was a very formative time in my career, and a very a really fun experience. And actually one of the people that I worked for there subsequently recruited me to Biogen many years later. So another thing to always, and something that as the longer my career goes on, the more and more I appreciate, is like building a network and understanding kind of the consequences of your kind of professional behavior and relationships that you build along the way is really important, and it comes back and pays dividends. My last several jobs, for example, have been purely network driven, where people have recommended me for different roles purely because they've worked with me in the past and know my set of expertise. And I always carry that with me, that, you know, whoever you work with, always view them as somebody who would be a potential kind of recommender or, you know, reference for you in a future role. It certainly worked for me in the past anyway. So after 4.5 years in Colorado, I moved back to London thinking I'd done my American experience, and worked at a research institute for a Japanese company, which was a big cultural transition. Actually, all of these are quite big cultural transitions, from the UK to the Wild West, and then back to work for a Japanese company, which is a very different environment from a Colorado-based biotech company. And then, as I said, from ASI, I was recruited to Biogen by somebody who I worked in Colorado with, and then spent the next 18 years of my career there, and that's where I still live. That's a little picture of my house. I'm very entrenched in the Boston area now. My family's here, and it's a great area. It has tons of opportunity, as you are all very well aware, I think. And I had Biogen, I often say, was working at 5 different companies. I was there so long, under so many different leadership CEOs, so many different CEOs and types of leadership and cultures, that it felt like many different companies that I worked for over my tenure. As part of that, as I already alluded to, as part of the Biogen experience, I had the opportunity to found a company and form a company, which was a great experience and quite a unique one, I think, in the context of the big pharma or a big biotech company. And then subsequent to Biogen, I moved to a company called Forma Therapeutics, which is just down the road in Watertown. And then about a year ago, I took on this role of Chief Business Officer at Verge Genomics, which is based in San Francisco. And that is another set of interesting opportunities and challenges, working for an early stage biotech company that's on another coast. We all know now what kind of remote working is like. I've been doing it for a year now. Most people have been doing it for 3 or 4 months, and it, you know, it's an interesting and different perspective on how we work. So anyway, I will end there and pass the baton over to Haroon to talk about his career, but welcome any questions at all about any of the things that I've spoken about.
Thank you, Jane. That was great. I appreciate the tour de force across a couple of continents. That was fun. And I like your house out there in the snowdrift. Kind of a cooling thought on a warm day today. So I'd like to now introduce Haroon, our second speaker today. So Haroon is currently the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Science at Ziopharm Oncology, where he oversees all regulatory functions and provides strategic support to the company's gene and cell therapy platforms. He has over 24 years of industry experience in global drug development, neurology, oncology, and hemophilia, covering US, EU, APAC regions. He played a key role in the expansion of Biogen business in the APAC region. And with that, Haroon, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it. And first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. And hopefully, I would like to share my career journey with you as well, to give you some idea as to like where I started and where I am today. So some of the thematic things that you will notice in my career journey is big decisions, time of sort of, you're at the fork in the road and you have to make a decision where to go. The other thematic thing that you will see is also the role of mentors and how people that I kind of looked up to, and not only your supervisors, but people within the industry or people that you kind of respected based on their judgment, based on their own career journey, and seeking their advice and helping me make the decisions. So that's the other one. And third part is the being a lifelong learner and making sure that the aspect of self-learning and self-educating yourself never stops throughout your career. So like Jane, starting off where my career started in actually Pakistan. So I'm originally from Pakistan, and I did my graduate studies in microbiology immunology from University of Karachi. And then after I graduated, I worked for an institution called Al-Khan University Hospital, and they were working on a project which was funded by WHO on leprosy. And I did work there for 1 year. And so the first aspect that came into play was that one day my supervisor asked, "What's your long-term plan?" Because they were thinking of bringing the microbiology lab and the immunology setting in the Al-Khan University Hospital, which was very well reputed. And they had collaboration with London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I basically just outright told her that I am really interested in going abroad for my PhD and pursue my studies further. So she said, okay. And in the meantime, my supervisor with whom I did my research at the university while I was doing my master's, she got her PhD from University of Maryland and did her postdoc in NIH. So she was one of my mentors. So as we were thinking about, like, I was applying to US universities as well as Canadian universities, and as happens in life, so my first fork came in is that I got admission in London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which was facilitated actually by my supervisor at Al-Khan University Hospital. And in the meantime, I got admissions from University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. And so there I was with both opportunities in my hand, and now it was time to make a decision. So I think, again, going back to your mentors, like, what do you do? Where do you go? It's a big decision in your life. And that's where, like, those conversations and open conversations with the mentors, without going into the details, kind of just help you make the decision that probably North America and Canada is the way to go. And I decided to come to Canada, where I went to University of Alberta, did my master's in experimental medicine. And then the next step was then I joined so like Jane, my entire career has been in the industry. So it was a small biotech company working on therapeutic cancer vaccines in lung cancer, breast cancer. So coming out of graduate school, I started in analytical development. So you go from bench scientist to being a bench researcher. And that's where, interestingly, the concept of coming out of a graduate school, you didn't know what else happens in the industry. So it's basically the same lab, same research. That's all that goes on into these. So had no idea about the CMC, about analytical, quality control, business development, clinical operations, regulatory. Did not know about any of these functions until I joined the company. So one of the aspect, I think, in terms of when you think about joining the analytical development, of course, there was a career track and a career ladder in there. You start with associate, senior associate manager, senior manager, associate director, so you can be a head of analytical development. So the career track was there. So now that I was in that job, then I started thinking that how do I want to develop my career? Where do I want to go? So that's where, again, the role of mentors become important. And as Jane alluded to, I think one of the best advice that I also got in early in that career was this, which I think now the terminology used for those are signature strengths. The strengths that you have your basic training, you have your qualifications, you have your degree, so that forms the foundation. But the advice was that you have to marry your inherent signature strengths with your scientific training, your whatever educational background is, and that is what is going to propel your career forward. So then you again talk to mentors. Of course, you do a self-evaluation, but you ask your peers, your friends, like, what are my signature strengths? What do you feel I do well? And then you seek people who can be very upfront. You're not really good at it, and it's not a matter of what is right and what is wrong, but it's truly understanding that's something that comes naturally to you. So once I found out, so what my peers or what my supervisors or some of my mentors identified is sort of, this ability to bring the teams together, the ability to kind of, see the bigger picture, but then, it's almost like you can envision the forest, but then you can come down and help the team plant the trees for that forest to appear as well. So I think with that, then I kind of went around within the Biomira to kind of understand what different roles and functional areas and what are the capabilities, what the day-to-day jobs. So it was a very active process in terms of kind of walking through trying to understand like where my best fit would be. So based on my own assessment, I kind of honed on to regulatory science as the place where I want to be, because it brings the sort of the aspect of scientific skills plus all the other capabilities that I felt that I could offer in terms of my personal strengths. And that switch took a little bit of a while because, again, like, the opportunities came in. I didn't give up, talked to the hiring manager within Biomira. And after 3 years, I made that transition into regulatory. So I think that was, it did not happen de novo. So I think if I were to kind of say that this was one of the pivotal moments, but the point that I want to highlight was a very active process in terms of understanding that beside my basic scientific training, that for me to propel in my career, I need to bring in my signature strengths, and then actively sorting out that what within the core functions of the industry, where that best fit would be. So the next step was, again, another big transition. Now that I have flown all the way from Pakistan to Canada, coming from Canada, the US was not that big of a deal, but got an opportunity at Biogen in the regulatory group. This was also kind of, happened because I knew that I was in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and those who know Canada, that was basically an oil province. So I knew that at some point I have to move on the East Coast, West Coast of Canada, or go to US if I want to pursue my career. So it was not surprising, but when the right timing came along and the right opportunity came, I came to Biogen. And yes, there is a cultural difference, for those of you who don't know, between Canada and US as well. Even though we are neighbors, but there are definitely cultural differences. So interestingly, I was in regulatory at Biogen for only a year, and I was very early in my career. So I was Senior Associate of Regulatory Science at that time. At Biogen, and overall in the industry, I had 6 years of experience, but within regulatory, I had literally like 3 to 4 years of experience at that stage. So that's when the biggest pivotal moment, I think, in my career came, which is the opportunity that at that time, Biogen had just started their Japan office, and they had this role in program management to kind of, coordinate our drug development and take our clinical trials into Japan. We were in collaboration with Genzyme at that time to develop one of our flagship product, Avonex, the interferon in multiple sclerosis. So they were about to get into the stage of filing a marketing application. So there was a lot of coordination needed there. So this was a program manager role to kind of help the president of Japan office to set up the Japan office, and but also coordinate between the teams here in the US and the organization that we were building in Japan in all functions. So kind of finance, PV, regulatory, clinical. So as you can imagine, that they were looking for individuals, and the individual within regulatory group who was heading our regulatory, so she was not my supervisor, she was my boss's boss's boss. So like 2 levels above, not in title, but in terms of the line of reporting, she was 2 levels up. So the president and I was part of the team, or the individuals that were interested in that position, and I interviewed. But as you can imagine, that for myself, I was terrified, terrified, to be honest, because I really felt that this was out of my comfort zone. Because for 2 reasons: A, I did not have international experience at that level. It was challenging me, or it would have challenged me in stepping into the functional areas that I have not dealt with. I was early in my career, and I just felt that maybe I will set myself up for failure. And this is where I think in one of the pitch for this session, I mentioned that, do you have someone in your career who can push you over the edge? So to this day, I owe a lot of my career to Jennifer Jackson, who was there at the person that I was mentioning. And she gave me a lot of assurance. Haroon, you will do a good job. Haroon, you will do a good job. Take it. And if it was not for her, maybe I would have chickened out, who knows? So because that was a big decision making, and it was like, and I think that's where I now truly buy into the philosophy, which I'm sure you may have heard, that the growth happens once you step outside your comfort zone. And that's exactly what happened in that role, is that I definitely stepped out of my comfort zone. And then basically in that role, as Jane was mentioning, that what it did was wonders to me from the perspective of understanding drug development, understanding the business side of things. That it's just not about science, it's just not about clinical trials. What happens in the commercial space, how you have to think about the competitive space in that environment? How do you have to think about drug reimbursement? So it's just giving that broader perspective of all the thought process that needs to go in there. I still was because there was heavy aspect of the regulatory, because drug development all the time goes through regulatory science. So it was good that I was continued, even though I stepped out of regulatory science per se, but as they say, you can get out of regulatory, but the regulatory never gets out of you, that I was able to continue to leverage that knowledge and continue to expand on that experience as well as while I was doing that. Then within Biogen, after doing that for about 3 years, that program manager role for Japan specifically, then I came back into regulatory science because it was like something, and one of the goals that I set myself was that I will integrate the two organizations so closely that you don't need that role. That's exactly one of my supervisor in US told me that if you do your job well, you will make your position obsolete, and that's exactly what I did. So then what happened, I went back into regulatory science, and then Biogen decided to expand in the broader APAC region, including China, India, South Korea, and things like that. And then sure enough, what happened is because I had played that role, and so then they tapped me again, that would you be interested in kind of helping us out with this? So this was again a great opportunity because for example, China and India were completely a blank slate for us. So we had a very small team of 5 people, and I was kind of helping our senior vice president of strategic initiatives to kind of more look from the drug development perspective. How do we get the pipeline going? But it was literally a whiteboard exercise. You just go into China and figure out what's happening on the drug development side. How do we get that? How do we establish what's the right office to establish? Who are the first sort of individuals that we need to hire? So at that time, for a while, I was wearing both hats, still taking on my regulatory function and helping with this. And at some point, it became too much, so I have to give that up and do the whole strategic initiative role. And that's what I did at Biogen. So to me, this one, again, you can think about it, that retrospectively, when I look at it, it's again, a mentor set me on that journey, somebody who kind of, knew my strengths and give me that push to take that on, stepping out of the comfort zone and learning. And after that, so after that, then basically what I did was went back to, after this, the experience in the broad company, the big company Biogen, went back to smaller startups like Alnylam, and now I'm at Ziopharm. And Ziopharm, I'm heading, as Charlie mentioned, the regulatory science group. So one other question that sometimes I share from my experience is, as you can see the trend, Biomira was a small company, about 150 people. And then I went to become a global biotech company. It was at that time probably the second or the third largest biotech company in the world, and then came back into a smaller company. Alnylam at that time when I joined was back in 250 people. Now it has grown considerably. And similarly, when I went from Alnylam to Ziopharm, it was also pretty small, like 60, 70 people at that time when I joined. So people ask, like, how do you feel the transition? Should you start with big and go to small, start to small? So from my experience, what I learned, I think the small, being at Biomira, starting off with there, you do get a better exposure, you get a better idea of the functioning, and you know everybody. So it was interesting. That was a huge transition coming from Biomira to Biogen. Honestly, for the first 3 months, I was completely lost. Like, how many forums do you have to go to, where the decisions are made? When I was at Biomira, you sit in one boardroom, all the functional heads are there and the decisions are made. When you go to Biogen and you are lost. And then there's the complexity of a multinational company. But that in itself, I think gaining that experience was extremely, extremely helpful, apart from everything else that I learned there. And then learning the leadership skills, and now coming back to kind of heading the group with that broader global drug development experience and business experience really helps in a smaller setup. And the last part I would say is that the third thematic thing, that throughout my career journey, yes, there are sometimes training sessions offered by the company and so on, but what I really learned and what I felt that I had to do, which is something that I got as also an advice from a mentor, is observe people who are more seasoned, who are more senior. How do they handle different situations in a meeting? How do they handle conflict? How do they, you have in your industry, there are very bright people, and you are sitting in a meeting and there are experts who have spent their life in toxicology and somebody who has spent their life as a clinicians, and now you are discussing the safety of a product and how do seasoned leaders kind of manage those differences. So a lot I learned from early in my career in observing people, and then also self-educating on leadership was always my favorite topic. So kind of reading books as to what good leaders do in terms of the listening skills or in terms of motivation. And now I feel, as Jane was saying, that I really feel that now it's time to pass on that mentorship. So it's not always that you should, at some point very early in your career, you are, even though people think that you only mentor once you become someone's boss, but you can also mentor if you're not a boss. And if you have nobody reporting to you, you can influence people's life based on your experiences and do the same thing so I was blessed with it. And now I'm extremely cognizant that people who are reporting to me or whom I have any influence, that I can pass on and be that mentor for them, those like the people that work for me. So I think that's where I would end, and I would be happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Well, that sounds great. Well, I appreciate both of your presentations, and we're going to transition now into the question and answer session. As we put up the pigeonhole on the screen here, we'll see which questions are voted to be the most interested, most popular by the attendees here today. And I would just remind everybody to please, if you haven't already, click on the link in your invitation to this event to be able to access Pigeonhole. Enter the questions that you might have, vote up the questions that you'd like to have answered, and we'll just dig right in. So the first question, if we could just go right to it, how did you transition from an individual performer to being a supervisor? So Jane, would you like to take that as lead?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So I was quite fortunate early in my career to build a team and grow and manage a group of about 10 scientists and research associates. And it kind of just came as with increasing responsibility around expanding, broadening the number of projects that I was overseeing, and kind of was a natural progression within the function that I worked. So I would say it was a career path that was kind of well tracked within the context of career growth within kind of the function that I worked in, the research function. So it wasn't something I had to kind of aggressively fight for. One of the challenges I would say that I faced quite early in my career was because I went through the British kind of graduate education program. I was very young when I came out of my PhD. I got my PhD at 24. So I was kind of quickly became a very young manager, and I wasn't far into my career when I realized that I was younger than all of my reports. So that was a difficult kind of, and it happened, I mentor people on it frequently now, that people who have, certainly people who have fast track careers or move into management roles quickly and early on, it's something that you kind of have to be cognizant of and respectful of your colleagues and your colleagues' experiences and your reports' experiences. So that was an interesting challenge in those early days. But yeah, I would say I don't look back and think of making that move as one that was a really challenging one and that I had to fight for, because it was in the context of the group that I worked in. It was kind of a natural progression, if that makes sense.
So if I could ask, so it sounds like that your organization was kind of set up to lead onto a pathway towards supervisory and leadership roles. Did you feel like you were prepared though? There's one thing to have the role, the other thing is to actually have the preparation and guidance to actually perform the role. How did you feel about your preparation, or did you kind of fall into it? It's a natural talent you had, or did you have some kind of guidance on how to become that supervisor?
I think, as Haroon alluded to, I think we were fortunate in the context of Biogen, when we both worked at Biogen, was to have those kind of training opportunities available to us. So I'd say partly it's something, management and leadership is something that I've kind of naturally gravitate towards and enjoy, and don't find it kind of particularly difficult. So, and part of it is kind of I naturally enjoy learning about it, and like Haroon also spoke to, kind of self-learned around it and made sure that I was personally kind of well tooled and able to play that role. But I don't know, those who work for me have a different opinion.
Please do.
I'd say, yeah, I mean, it's kind of a self-awareness thing, like like I'm a big fan of feedback, and you know, people often say feedback's a gift, and as a manager I always ask for, you know, I like to give feedback, constructive feedback, and I like to receive it, and that's something that has been very helpful in my kind of management career, is like, tell me how I can better perform as a manager, as well as help you grow as an individual.
That's a good tip.
I think yeah, I think it's a very easy, but it's also very hard. And the very easy part to me is usually by the time you are put in a role of a supervisor, the people who are putting in you that role kind of have faith in your competency in terms of your subject matter expert. So like Jane, like, you know, she's a brilliant scientist, so she know that she can direct and manage that. So there is the core competency that you have. Like if I'm in regulatory science, so I am being given direct reports once I am managing enough projects, and I can let's say direct an associate as to what needs to be done from a filing perspective, etc. So you of course you are given those direct reports once people have faith that you have the competency. I think for me the hardest part, which Jane alluded to, is the self-awareness part, is that how seriously, and to this day, I think once I got my first report, I realized the burden of having to kind of, you know, be responsible for developing people. I think so. If you think that just, you know, now I'm a boss and I'm just going to tell people what to do, but if you take that as a responsibility, that now you have the responsibility of looking after someone else's career as well and develop them. To me, that's a big responsibility. And then in terms of the self-awareness, you don't. If you hated something that you did not like, micromanagement, some of the things that everybody hates, then you try to make sure that you don't become that person to your direct reports. So all that aspect of developing, I feel to this day, like every time I have somebody new hired directly under me, and even people through my line function, it's almost like, okay, what have you done to kind of create a development plan for them? To me, that's the biggest challenge, and I consider that as a big responsibility.
That's interesting. So the combination of authority and responsibility, and accountability, actually, too, are a big combination of, you know, transitioning into that leadership role. All right, turning to our next question. How do you get your first people management role, or how did you get your first people management role? So it sounds like, Jane, it was a natural for you. It was expected in your organization. Haroon, actually, I'm going to explore in the career transition where your mentor kind of pushed you over the edge. You were just 2 seconds ago were saying about how you feel confident because you have expertise in an area that gives you that kind of confidence to be able to, hey, I know what I'm doing. But how about those situations, and I've been there too, I think, where you get into a leadership position and you might not have that technical competence to be the foundation. How do you, and it sounds like that was maybe one of the cases that you needed that push to get over the edge. Could you maybe talk to that piece of it?
Yeah, sure. And I think this actually question becomes even more important from that perspective, because I'm glad you highlighted that how did you get your first people management role? So interestingly, when I took that role for program manager Japan, by that time I did not have anyone directly reporting to me still. But interestingly, going into that role, now I was supposed to like influence without authority, especially my Japan colleagues now. So you now talk about the cultural differences, and now you have to kind of, nobody's reporting to you, you don't have any direct authority, but you have to influence them to kind of, you know, perform in a certain way. So I think that's where the sort of the cultural sensitivity, that's going back to the signature strengths. I think that's why probably I was pushed in that role, because my superiors felt that I would be able to strike that balance, that there are certain competency, I know what I need to get done, but I can also manage that sensitivities where I don't have the authority and would not kind of, step on people's toes, but all, and that capability of being able to see from a vision perspective where we need to go, but then methodically work with the team members to kind of do what needs to be done in a more collaborative, collegial manner rather than as sort of an authoritative figure to tell them what to do. And I think, so then coming back into regulatory after performing that role, just kind of, you just have better maturity, you have more maturity, and sure enough, when I came back, I had broader responsibility and I was given direct reports right after that as well. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jane, maybe you could comment on this type of leadership where you're influencing people, but not necessarily your direct reports. So trying to get an organization going in a direction. It sounds like you, with the launch of your innovation cell within Biogen, might be an example of how you needed to get some sponsors to get something going.
Yeah, I think managing in a matrix or managing by influence is a really important skill to learn, and it's this classic step from management to leadership. I think managing in a matrix is where you're out of your area of expertise, and trying to corral people towards a common goal is a different skill from being very directive and saying, these are the tasks in this specialist area that we need to accomplish by such and such a date. They're kind of two different skill sets, and both very important, I think, as one's career progresses. I'd say on the people management front early on, it's important to enable people, to allow them, kind of give them the runway to be able to perform to the best of their ability, but not to. I have an allergic reaction to micromanagement, so I always try and enable people to kind of be the best version of themselves in their professional world. And one of the things that you have to appreciate when you do that is you have to allow people to make mistakes. So you have to kind of relinquish responsibility enough to allow people to learn from their mistakes, because people tend to learn more from mistakes than from doing a mediocre job or doing a job that they think is good enough but could be better. And so that's something I've learned over the years. So one of the things around people management that I always try and emphasize is understanding what people want to do, can do, are able to do, and then giving them the kind of the launch pad to be able to do it. But then, as you say, this additional and slightly different skill is like managing in a matrix, and I've found it challenging and gratifying at the same time. It's difficult when you, in our industry, we work with a lot of incredibly intelligent, incredibly qualified people, and to be able to bring people together collectively and kind of move them all in the same direction it can be quite challenging, because there are often some very strong personalities and very kind of traditional, different ways of doing things that are around the table. So it's a good skill to have.
Certainly, I think one key aspect to that is building trust, right? So we are just sometimes so hung up upon timelines, and especially if you are now taking on a leadership role or getting into that matrix environment where you have to invest some time in building trust, and a lot of that has to be genuine. It's not something that you put a face on, but literally, like, getting people along in terms of trusting, like, we are working for the same cause, we have the same mission and things like that. And then people will do anything for you once they develop that affinity for you as a leader, a genuine affinity, which is based on your genuineness, then they will do anything for you, and it will become easier.
Excellent. All right. I just say one thing, Jane, too. There's also leadership without a matrix. Sometimes in small companies haven't even got to the point of having a matrix, and it's kind of could be a free-for-all. So that's another extent of that same kind of leadership by influence. All right. So our next question is, how did you find a mentor? Haroon, I'm going to ask you first. This is really one of your thematic areas for today. So what is your strategy for finding a mentor? And I'm going to also ask the other question, what's your strategy for making yourself available as a mentor?
Right. So I think one aspect was that I was blessed. Like, so some of the supervisors that I got throughout my career, they were just good mentors to begin with. Like, you know, they invested time in kind of teaching me. But to answer the question, how do you find a mentor? What is most important to me, because I think there is the technical expertise and being successful, people being successful. But one trait that I look for is humility. That is extremely important to me. So the core personal values of an individual is very important to me in looking at the mentor, because then it's not dog eat dog world. It's like mentor me in the broader perspective of being a better human being, right? So yes, career success is important, but I don't want to leave dead bodies behind me in pursuing my career, right? So, so to me, some of the people that I look is like what I appreciated, that while they were very successful from a career perspective, but they were very humble people that kind of, you know, also kind of have a broader perspective on life, and they can strike that balance. So it's almost like they are not seeking out glory. The glory is just coming to them because who they are. So that's how I would look for a mentor. And in terms of how do I now try to do that is also kind of, you know, not trying to be obnoxious that I'm going to go and impart my wisdom to anybody, but like even a student level, like somebody says that, you know, can you come and give a lecture on drug development? I love to teach. So if there is somebody that you feel is looking for that, you find the time for them. That, you know, if somebody asks you a question, or if somebody stops me at work and says that, you know, would you, like, how do you do that? And I say, okay, let's set up some time, let's go for coffee. Like, you know, I'm not going to call you in my office and give you a lecture, but it's like, okay, what are you thinking? So rather than just imparting them, I think it's kind of understanding, and that's what I felt that when the mentors were talking to me, is like, it's almost like asking me the questions, like, and, you know, making honing on my own thought process rather than just giving me hardcore trips, do this, do that, do's and don'ts. It's like helping me kind of figure out my own thinking process, what's important to me, how do I want to build my career. And I think that's what I try to do with the people that I try to mentor.
That's excellent. Jane?
Yeah, I had a couple of points to add to that, actually. So I would say my advice would be, like, don't be afraid to ask. So approach people. There's so many people out there who have who've spent a lot of time in the industry, are very willing and happy to serve in a mentoring role. And you shouldn't be afraid to go out and ask people who you respect or admire or would like to learn something from. And then the second piece would be kind of make it easy for them. So know what you want to ask, think of questions that you'd like to kind of have a constructive discussion around. You know, don't presume to take too much of their time. Say, can we meet for a coffee for 20 minutes, half an hour? I'd love to talk to you about this one particular professional kind of thing I'm wrestling with, or question that I might have that's relevant to your experience, and I'd appreciate just a small amount of your time. And then build a relationship, and just make it like a pleasant interaction, and something that's not too doesn't take too much of your time, but is focused and useful for both of you, and both of you leave having gained something from the conversation. But you'd be surprised how many people are really willing and happy to carve out, you know, reasonable chunks of time out of their busy schedules to be able to just to have those conversations, because it's very gratifying if you think you can help somebody kind of along the way with a piece of advice that you've personally lived through or had experience of. So that's what I would add to that one.
Absolutely. Well, great. That's fantastic advice. So our next question, what can be done to increase diversity and inclusion in the industry? So who'd like to kind of take the first stab at that? It's kind of a broad question.
I'll open it up, and then Haroon, maybe you can add,
Sure.
add on. I think our industry in particular suffers from a lack of diversity and inclusion, and my personal philosophy behind it is not to be too militant about kind of actioning it, but to constantly be aware and kind of raise awareness and call out issues if they're you know, blatantly obvious or egregious. But I personally don't feel that I've been, you know, victim to to diversity or inclusion issues. But I am very aware of, for example, unconscious biases, which I know I have in one direction and other people have in another direction. And I think it's things like unconscious bias training, or just generally increasing awareness that these things do exist, and that the more we're aware of it, the better. You know, awareness is the first step on the journey of trying to change people's perceptions and change people's actions. But the more diverse, the more we move to a more diverse environment, the less of an issue it will become, because we'll have more of a mix going forward. But
So let me just probe a little bit. So in your work life, are you involved in any organizations or activities that advocate for, let's say, inclusion or diversity?
I have been throughout my career. At the moment, I'm not actively involved in any, but for example, I keep a very close eye on our hiring kind of profiles, and make sure that we have a diverse slate of candidate for any role that we have coming in. Mm-hmm. I have an inherent bias for hiring women and minorities, and so I have to, I have to make sure my unconscious biases aren't creating an organization that is, exclusively women or too strong, that it's a healthy mix. So I kind of tend to watch myself in that direction. But I think when I was at Biogen, they had an outstanding diversity and inclusion program, which we were very active in a number of different ways. But at smaller organizations, it's difficult to specifically kind of organize around it, but just to maintain a kind of awareness around it.
Okay, thank you. Haroon?
Yeah, I know. I think I will echo Jane's sentiments that it's mainly around the sort of the subconscious biases, and yes, there are challenges and we cannot undermine, but like her, I was fortunate that I did not at least overtly experience any challenges in terms of the diversity. And in terms of like mentoring people, I'm not involved in an organization, but because of course of my ethnic background, like within my industry, I have people have spoken to me about it. Like, what have you faced any challenges? What are the challenges? And I mean, sometimes with them, I don't have to be politically correct because I can advise them. So sometimes, for example, in our industry or in any industry, communications is very important, right? And different jobs have different responsibilities and different scopes. So for example, and I have been very frank with people that if you have language is a barrier for you coming from a different country, and you are really interested in doing a commercial job versus if you are doing a lab job, so from a technical perspective, it's not a reflection on your capability or ability, but there is a certain strength that is a requirement for that job. So while you will be extremely successful, where if you have a communication barrier that does not rely heavily on communication, but if you want to pursue in a career which is heavily relying on communication and language is a barrier, then you could not assume that there is a discrimination against you because of that. But you have to see that, for you to be successful in that career, in that profession, and for the company to be successful with whomever they put in that role, somebody who's good at communication is a requirement, right? So rather than seeing that as a sort of worst case scenario, thinking that you are being victimized, think about that what capability you need to build. So that's it from my perspective. From my first transition, from the first flight that I took from Pakistan to Canada, that has been the thing, is that focus on my self-improvement, like what do I need to do, and not worry that there will be some sort of issue with discrimination or diversity issue. But then to Jane's point, that I don't want to undermine that either, and say that we all have to raise the awareness that these challenges are there and we need to be inclusive of that.
Okay. Well, that's a fantastic conversation, and it turns out that we're on the hour now, so we're going to bring it to an end. I would like to first of all thank our panelists today for a great conversation and sharing your experience and your thoughts about career development. The information is going to be, this webinar will be recorded and available on the ISPE Boston website for future viewing. If you would like to share this with any of your colleagues, any of the or the general public. And I'd also like to say thank you to our dedicated sponsors for the series, DPS Group, ICQ Consultants, and Massey Bioservices. And on behalf of ISPE Boston Educational Committee, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Take care.
Thank you for the opportunity.